The Grand Aura classroom of the Galactic Union Academy was a place of sublime, overwhelming technology. Its domed ceiling was a perfect, real-time star chart, nebulae swirling in silent majesty. The air hummed with the low thrum of anti-gravity projectors and the faint, ozone scent of active energy conduits. Around the central teaching dais, workstations floated, each equipped with holographic displays, molecular forges, and a smorgasbord of exotic materials that glittered like a cosmic garage sale of potential destruction. It was here, in the Interspecies Applied Ballistics 201 course, that the best and brightest of the known galaxy came to learn the elegant art of making things go very, very fast in a very, very specific direction. The students themselves were a testament to the Union's diversity. There was Grak, a grok from a high-gravity world, whose 4 muscular arms were currently calibrating a miniature mass driver. His species was all chitinous plates and raw, kinetic power. They solved most problems by hitting them until the problems ceased to exist. Next to him, a pair of crystalline silicates communicated in chimes of pure light, assembling a weapon that focused sound into a concussive lance. Across the room, a willowy, insectoid Cthar delegate meticulously polished the focusing lens of a plasma caster, its mandibles clicking with intense concentration. And then there was Jake. Jake was a human. This fact alone made him an object of immense curiosity and, more often than not, thinly veiled pity. Humanity was new to the galactic stage, a strange, soft-skinned species from a forgotten corner of the galaxy. They had no exoskeleton, no natural claws, no telekinetic abilities, no redundant organs, and a shockingly low tolerance for hard vacuum. Galactic consensus held that humans were, to put it politely, fragile. They were a species that had somehow stumbled into space not through evolutionary superiority, but through a bizarre and frankly alarming level of stubbornness. Their technology was considered derivative, their physiology a biological dead end. They were the galactic equivalent of a flightless bird that had somehow managed to build an airplane out of twigs and hope. The instructor, Proctor Kaelwythar, was a Xylosian, a species renowned for their intellectual rigor and a complete lack of a sense of humor. He resembled a tall, slender praying mantis crafted from polished obsidian, and his voice was a series of dry, precise clicks and whistles, translated by a small device hovering near his head. He considered teaching this course his sacred duty, a way to impart the elegant truths of physics onto the less enlightened. He also considered the presence of a human in his advanced class to be a tedious administrative error, but the Union's inclusivity charters were annoyingly absolute. As you know, the translator intoned, Kaelwythar's multifaceted eyes sweeping across the room. The final project for this semester requires the practical application of our theoretical studies. You will each construct a personal ranged kinetic delivery system from the provided materials. The objective is not annihilation, but precision. You are to tag a moving target. He made a complex gesture with one of his forelimbs, and a small, sleek drone detached from a charging port on the ceiling. It was an XT-7 Inquisitor model, a top-of-the-line surveillance unit used by Union peacekeepers. It was about the size of a human fist, jet black, and moved with an unnatural, silent grace. It zipped around the room in a blur, its movements too quick and erratic for most organic eyes to track. This unit's evasion protocols are set to maximum, Kaelwythar announced, a hint of what could only be described as academic smugness in his translated voice. Its predictive algorithm can calculate over 1 million possible trajectories per second. It will analyze your weapon's energy signature, projectile velocity, and your own biosigns to anticipate your shot before you even take it. To successfully tag the Inquisitor is to demonstrate a true mastery of applied ballistics. His gaze lingered for a fraction of a second too long on the human. The provided materials include stabilized plasma cores, focused light emitters, electromagnetic accelerators, and grade 5 alloys. Choose your components wisely. Jake stepped up to his workstation. He looked, for all intents and purposes, like a particularly unremarkable example of an already unremarkable species. He was of average height, with brown hair that refused to be combed and a face that was pleasant but instantly forgettable. His standard-issue academy uniform seemed a size too large, bunching at the shoulders. He looked less like a student of advanced weaponry and more like someone who had gotten lost on his way to a botany lecture. Grak, the four-armed grok, let out a low rumble that was the vocal equivalent of an eye roll. He'd seen holovids of humans. They bruised if you looked at them too hard. This was going to be embarrassing. Jake surveyed the glittering array of high-tech components on his workstation. He saw the miniature fusion batteries, the gleaming barrels of precision-rifled alloys, the intricate focusing crystals that could turn a beam of light into a surgical scalpel. He gently pushed them all aside. His movements were calm and deliberate, completely at odds with the high-stakes, high-tech environment. He began to rummage through the secondary bins, the ones filled with structural supports, raw material samples, and what was essentially technological packing peanuts. Kale Wyther watched, his antennae twitching in irritation. The human was ignoring the primary components, a classic sign of a primitive mind overwhelmed by choice. He was probably looking for something shiny to hang around his neck. The proctor made a mental note to file a complaint with the admissions board. This was a waste of a slot that could have gone to a far more deserving and chromosomally complex species. Jake's search stopped. He pulled out a Y-shaped metallic strut, about 30 centimeters long. It was a simple support bracket, made of a lightweight but durable molybdenum alloy. He tested its weight, turning it over in his soft, fleshy hands. Then he went back to the bins. He rummaged past conduits and power cells until he found a roll of synthetic polymer, a highly elastic band used for dampening vibrations in engine housings. He unspooled the length of it and stretched it, a thoughtful expression on his face. Finally, he wandered over to the geological display, a collection of planetary core samples. He picked up a tray labeled Sol System, Planet 3. Silicate sedimentary samples. He sifted through the small, smooth stones, selecting a half-dozen that were almost perfectly round, and weighed them in his palm. A rock. He had chosen a rock. Grak actually stopped his work to stare. He looked at his own creation, a quad-coil Gauss rifle capable of punching a projectile through 3 inches of starship hull, and then at the human, who was now carefully trimming the elastic band with a standard-issue utility cutter. The big grok leaned over to his Kthar classmate. "Is he building a nutritional supplement catapult?" he rumbled, his voice thick with derision. The insectoid student simply clicked his mandibles in a gesture of bemused contempt. Jake paid them no mind. He began to assemble his device. He notched the ends of the Y-shaped strut. He carefully tied the elastic band to the 2 notched forks. In the middle of the band, he fashioned a small pouch from a scrap of durable fabric he found in a recycling chute. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. When he was finished, he held it up. It was a slingshot, a simple, crude, comically primitive tool. He placed one of the smooth river stones into the pouch, drew the band back to his cheek, and sighted down the frame. He didn't fire. He just held the pose for a moment, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Then he relaxed, pocketing the stone and the slingshot. He leaned against his workstation, crossed his arms, and waited. He looked utterly, maddeningly calm. He even started to whistle, a strange, lilting tune that was completely alien to every other being in the room. It was a cheerful, carefree sound that felt profoundly out of place, like a nursery rhyme being hummed in an operating theater. The other students began their attempts. The first was a luminous silicate, whose weapon fired a focused beam of hard light. The beam was incredibly fast, but the Inquisitor drone jinked away a microsecond before the shot was fired, the light searing a black mark on the far wall. The drone's predictive algorithm had read the energy buildup in the silicate's crystalline body. Failure. Next was a student from a gaseous species who had constructed a vortex cannon. It fired a tight spiral of compressed air. The drone, detecting the sudden pressure shift, simply dropped 10 feet in an instant, the vortex harmlessly sailing over it. Failure. Then it was Grak's turn. The grok hefted his massive quad-coil rifle. It hummed with power, blue light arcing between the magnetic rails. He grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. Brute force was its own kind of precision. He didn't need to be subtle. He just needed to fill a large area with a very fast piece of metal. He aimed, his 4 arms steadying the weapon, and fired. A tungsten slug, accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light, screamed across the room. But the drone was already moving. It had anticipated the shot not from the weapon, but from the tensing of Grak's considerable muscle mass. The slug tore a hole in the ceiling, showering the floor with metallic dust, but the drone was untouched, hovering mockingly in the center of the room. Grak roared in frustration, slamming one of his fists against his workstation. One by one, the galaxy's finest failed. Plasma bolts were dodged. Sonic pulses were deflected. Crystalline shards were evaded. Proctor Kael'Wythar's antennae were practically vibrating with smug satisfaction. His Inquisitor was performing flawlessly. It was a monument to Xylosian engineering. It was proving his point that superior technology, guided by superior intellect, was the ultimate arbiter of competence. Finally, only one student remained. Human Jake, the Proctor's translator announced, the tone dripping with condescending formality. You may proceed, if you are able. A wave of soft clicks, chitters, and rumbles of amusement rippled through the class. Jake pushed himself off his workstation and walked to the center of the room. He seemed so small and vulnerable under the vast, swirling star chart of the ceiling. He held up his ridiculous contraption. The stick. The rubber band. The scrap of cloth. It was a joke. A punchline to a story about primitive inadequacy. Jake reached into his pocket and produced one of the small, gray stones. He calmly fitted it into the leather pouch. He didn't raise the weapon yet. He just stood there, watching the drone. The little black machine zipped and weaved through the air, its movements a chaotic dance of pure mathematics. It flew in tight loops, executed sudden directional shifts, and hovered in place for fractions of a second before darting away again. It was impossible to hit. Kael'Wythar, watching from his console, decided to add a final layer of humiliation. He surreptitiously keyed in a command, boosting the drone's processing speed by another 20% and activating a subroutine he'd designed himself. The contemptuous flourish, the drone's movements became even more erratic, even more arrogant. It flew a lazy circle around Jake's head, close enough for the human to feel the breeze from its anti-grav emitters, before zipping to the far side of the room. A clear message, you are not a threat. Jake's expression didn't change. His breathing was slow and even. His heart rate, as displayed on a public monitor Kael'Wythar had activated for dramatic effect, was a steady, almost meditative 72 beats per minute. Grax had spiked to over 200 during his attempt. This human was either pathologically calm or simply too stupid to understand fear. And then Jake moved. But it wasn't the kind of movement they expected. He didn't tense up. He didn't brace himself. He relaxed. His shoulders slumped slightly. His grip on the slingshot was firm, but not tight. He raised the Y-shaped frame, drawing the pouch back to the corner of his mouth. He anchored his hand against his cheek, a solid, unmoving point of reference. He wasn't aiming at the drone. This was the first thing that sent a jolt of confusion through Kael'Wythar's analytical mind. The human's eyes were tracking the drone, yes, but the weapon itself was pointed at empty space. He was leading the target, but by an absurd margin. The drone was currently on the left side of the room, and the human was aiming to the right. It was a novice's mistake, a gross miscalculation of projectile velocity versus target speed. The rock would travel so slowly, the drone would have time to fly across the room, follow flight plan, and leave for a short vacation before the projectile even got halfway there. Jake's eyes were half-lidded. He was watching the drone's dance. But he wasn't just watching its position. He was watching its rhythm. He saw what the others, with their technologically enhanced senses and superior processing power, had missed. The drone wasn't truly random. It was following an algorithm. A brilliant, complex algorithm, but an algorithm nonetheless. It had patterns. Micro-patterns. There was a fractional second delay when it shifted momentum from a vertical to a horizontal vector. There was a slight wobble, almost imperceptible, as the internal gyroscope compensated for a sharp turn. It was a machine pretending to be a butterfly, and Jake could see the gears turning behind the wings. The drone performed another contemptuous flourish, zipping straight towards Jake, only to veer off at the last possible second. It was pure showboating. And in that moment of triumphant, pre-programmed arrogance, the drone made its fatal mistake. To execute the maneuver, it had to briefly lock its trajectory, relying on the opponent's flinch reaction to give it the time it needed to escape. It was a psychological trick designed to exploit the startled prey response hardwired into most organic life. Jake didn't flinch. His thumb and forefinger released the leather pouch. The motion was fluid, economical, and utterly without fanfare. There was no flash of light, no crackle of energy, no sonic boom. Just a quiet thwip as the elastic band snapped forward and a faint whiz as the small, gray stone cut through the air. The stone flew in a high, lazy arc. It was pathetically slow. On the main view screen, a trajectory plot appeared, showing the rock's simple parabolic curve. It was a line of primitive, brute force physics imposed on a world of elegant energy vectors. The drone's processor registered the incoming object. It analyzed the data: mass, negligible; velocity, laughable; energy signature, non-existent. It was classified as an environmental anomaly. A piece of falling debris, perhaps. Not a threat. The drone's predictive algorithm, which had so brilliantly dodged plasma bolts and tungsten slugs, literally could not comprehend the danger of a thrown rock. It didn't even bother to evade. Its own contemptuous flourish carried it directly into the rock's path. There was a sharp, distinct crack. It was a sound that cut through the electronic hum of the room like a shard of glass. For a moment, nothing happened. The drone completed its maneuver, hovering in the air as if to say, "See? Nothing." Then, a spiderweb of fractures appeared across its primary optical sensor. A wisp of smoke curled from a damaged power conduit. One of its anti-grav emitters sputtered, then died, sending the drone into a lopsided, pathetic spiral. It clattered to the polished floor of the dais, landing with the sad, final sound of broken technology. A single, triumphant red light blinked on its chassis. Target tagged. Silence. The kind of silence that is not merely the absence of sound, but a presence of its own. It was a thick, heavy blanket of pure, unadulterated shock. The swirling nebulae on the ceiling seemed to pause. The hum of the workstations sounded distant and weak. Every eye in the room was fixed on the scene. The broken, state-of-the-art drone on the floor, and the unassuming human in the center of the room, calmly lowering his primitive stick and rubber band weapon. Grak the Grok was staring, his four powerful hands hanging limp at his sides. He was trying to process what he had just seen. The tungsten slug from his rifle had traveled at over 10,000 meters per second. The human's rock couldn't have been moving faster than 50. Yet the rock had succeeded where overwhelming force had failed. It didn't make sense. It was like watching a mountain get eroded by a single drop of rain. It was a violation of the natural order of things. Proctor Kael'Wythar was frozen at his console. His multifaceted eyes were wide, his mandibles parted slightly. On his monitor, the drone's final diagnostic log was flashing. Impact event. Projectile type, unclassified. Kinetic force, minimal. Trajectory, analog. Evasion subroutine, not triggered. Cause of failure, algorithmic contempt. The final phrase was one he had programmed himself, a bit of academic vanity. Seeing it now felt like being stabbed with his own pen. How? The word was a dry rasp from Kael'Wythar's translator. It was not a demand. It was a plea. A plea for the universe to make sense again. The Inquisitor's predictive algorithm is flawless. It models every variable. The energy signature of your weapon, there was none. The velocity, it was rudimentary. The targeting mechanics. How could you possibly calculate that trajectory? Jake pocketed his slingshot and walked over to the geological display. He picked up another smooth, gray stone, turning it over and over in his fingers. He looked at the assembled class, at the array of powerful, technologically superior beings who were now staring at him as if he had just grown a second head. Calculate, Jake said, his voice calm and even. I didn't calculate. I aimed. That is impossible, Kael'Wythar clicked, taking a step forward. To aim at a target moving with that level of chaotic velocity requires processing power far beyond the capacity of an organic, UNS-augmented brain. Especially a human 1-inch. The insult was reflexive, a vestige of a worldview that was rapidly crumbling. Jake offered a small, patient smile. You're right, he said, which only confused them further. My brain can't track 1,000,000 trajectories a second. But it doesn't have to. Your drone's brain can. And that was its weakness. He held up the small stone. You all built weapons that tried to outthink the drone. You tried to be faster, or more powerful, or more complex. You were trying to beat a calculator at math. He paused, letting the words sink in. I didn't. I built a weapon the calculator wouldn't recognize. On my world, we call this a slingshot. Technically, it's a kid's toy. A fresh wave of horrified silence swept the room. A toy. He had defeated a military-grade surveillance drone with a child's plaything. You see, Jake continued, his tone shifting into that of a patient teacher explaining a simple concept. Your drone is programmed to recognize threats. It looks for energy signatures, high velocities, complex projectiles. It's designed to fight a war of technology. This, he held up the rock, isn't technology. It's just a lump of matter. It has no power source. It has no guidance system. To your drone's sensors, it was no different from a fleck of dust. It was so far beneath its notice that it never even considered it a threat. He walked over to the broken drone and nudged it with his foot. But the real trick isn't the weapon. It's the user. You said my brain is slow, and you're right. But it evolved in a place that works on a different set of rules. We didn't have to learn how to dodge plasma bolts. We had to learn how to dodge a pouncing predator. Grack leaned forward, his warrior instincts peaked. Predators, he rumbled. Your world has predators? Without exoskeletons? How do you survive? Jake looked at the hulking, four-armed alien and gave a slight shrug. We run. We hide. We climb. And we learn to throw things. Very, very accurately. We've been throwing rocks at things that want to eat us for about 2 million years. It's a skill that gets passed down. Not in our genes, but in our instincts. It's the first thing a human child learns after walking. How to throw a ball. It's play, but it's also practice. We are born intuitive artillery. He turned his attention back to Kale Wythar. Your mistake, Proctor, was thinking the drone's greatest strength was its mind. Its algorithm. But any system, no matter how complex, can be understood. And anything that can be understood can be manipulated. I didn't need to predict where the drone was going to be. I just had to watch it. I watched its rhythm, its little ticks. The way it favored its portside thruster on a hard turn. The way it always feinted high before diving low. It wasn't random, it was a script. A very complicated script, but a script nonetheless. And when an actor gets too confident in his lines, he gets predictable. He gestured to the drone. That last maneuver. The close-range flyby. That was arrogance. It was programmed arrogance, but arrogance all the same. It was designed to make me panic, to flinch. A flinch is a predictable, biological reaction. But on Earth, if you flinch, you die. So we learn not to. We learn to stand our ground, to wait for the exact moment the predator commits. The moment it leaps. In that moment, its path is set. It can't change course midair. Your drone, in its moment of programmed arrogance, committed. It locked its trajectory, and I just had to put a rock where it was going to be. The room was so quiet. Jake could hear the faint, high-pitched chime of the silicate students processing this information. Kale Wythar looked from the human to the schematics of his drone on the main screen, his entire academic foundation turning to sand beneath his feet. He had dedicated his life to the study of quantifiable, predictable forces. This was something else. This was psychology. This was predator-prey dynamics applied to advanced engineering. It was like trying to solve a physics equation with a poem. But the sheer improbability, Kale Wythar stammered. The margin for error is infinitesimal. A millimeter's deviation in your aim, a microsecond's hesitation in your release. That's where the other half of my species' survival strategy comes in, Jake said, his voice losing its professorial tone and becoming something flatter, something more serious. Persistence. You see, we're not the strongest species on our world. Not by a long shot. We're not the fastest. We don't have the biggest teeth or the sharpest claws. But we are the most stubborn. There was a time when we hunted by just walking after something. For days. We'd just follow it, relentlessly, until it collapsed from sheer exhaustion. We are the ultimate endurance predators. He looked around at the assembled aliens. My first shot might have missed. My second, too. I had 5 more rocks in my pocket. I would have stood here all day, learning the drone's patterns, getting a little closer each time. I would have kept shooting until I ran out of rocks, and then I would have gone to find more rocks. The drone would have run out of battery long before I ran out of patience. In a battle of attrition between a machine and a human, the human will win every single time. Because the machine has a power limit. Human stubbornness doesn't. He let that final statement hang in the air. The other students were no longer looking at him with pity or amusement. They were looking at him with a new, deeply unsettling emotion. Grak was staring at Jake's soft, fleshy hands, trying to reconcile their apparent fragility with the lethal precision they had just demonstrated. He was imagining being hunted by this creature. Not a quick, honorable fight, but a slow, grinding pursuit across plains and mountains, with rocks being thrown from the shadows, day after day, until his mighty warrior's body finally gave out. For the first time in his life, Grak felt a tremor of genuine fear. Kael'Wathar's mind was racing, recontextualizing everything he thought he knew about the human species. Their primitive technology wasn't a sign of failure. It was a sign that they didn't need anything better. Their fragile bodies weren't a weakness. They were an evolutionary pressure cooker that had forged something far more dangerous. A mind capable of turning physics into an instinct and patience into a weapon. They treated being underestimated not as an insult, but as a strategic advantage. It was camouflage. He looked at the human, truly looked at him, and saw past the ill-fitting uniform and the mild-mannered face. He saw the ghost of 1,000,000 years of survival on a planet that was actively, relentlessly trying to kill him. A death world. The Union xenobiologists called such places theoretical planets so hostile that the evolution of intelligent life should be impossible. And this specimen, this Jake, was not just a survivor of such a place. He was its apex predator. Human Jake, Kael'Wathar said, his translator's voice now stripped of all its earlier arrogance. It was quiet, reedy, and full of a dawning, existential dread. Your demonstration was conclusive. You have passed this course. He paused, his antennae drooping slightly. May I ask, what was your profession before you enrolled in the academy? What specialized training produced such results? Were you a military marksman? An elite assassin? Jake picked a piece of lint off his uniform sleeve, his expression returning to its usual pleasant neutrality. He seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. Oh, me, he said with a casual smile. No, nothing that exciting. For the last 5 years, I was a kindergarten teacher. The statement landed in the silent room with the force of a physical blow. Kael'Wathar's mandibles clicked shut with an audible snap. Grak's lower jaw went slack. The silicates flickered a color that their species usually reserved for witnessing a supernova. Their minds, one collective and one individual, tried and failed to comprehend the reality of what he had just said. A creature this patient, this precise, this lethally competent, was entrusted with the care and education of its species' youngest members. A kindergarten. They tried to imagine it. A classroom of small, soft, terrifyingly competent humans, flinging objects with instinctive, deadly accuracy. A playground that was not a place of recreation, but a training ground, a crucible where the foundational skills of persistence and psychological warfare were honed. The sheer, unadulterated horror of what a human recess must entail flooded their minds. Humanity wasn't just a species of death world survivors. They were a species that was actively, systematically, and cheerfully raising the next generation of them, starting from the moment they could walk. The galaxy was in so much more trouble than it had ever realized.